Welcome back everyone. Today we'll be discussing Godfall and its take on the looter genre. The devs have self-proclaimed Godfall to be the first looter slasher of its kind, which at the moment I can't seem to deny, but only at the moment because I can't think of any games like it. But feel free to comment with your opinions below on the matter. Godfall absolutely shares all the qualities that you'd look for in looter shooter games, all the good and bad qualities. So here I'll cover where this game succeeds and where it falls short like others of its kind. A lot of comparisons will be made, just bear with me. So what makes games of this specific genre successful? The end game. Players want to know that all the gear that is constantly being obtained will go towards creating builds that aid them towards overcoming the end game activity. Looters are not about the journey, unfortunately, but the end, meaning Godfall, and those like it don't focus on the story of the game, which is unfortunate and a huge missed opportunity, not only for a new IP, but a so-called first of its kind. These type of games focus on the gameplay and what will keep players coming back to play it. So let's start with the bad. The story of Godfall isn't interesting and did not captivate my attention in the slightest, and just like the original Destiny and Division, also Anthem, the story has an easily forgettable plot. In Godfall, most of the story was discussed through dialogue between the player and his omnipresent companion.
We are heading into the monolith. Once inside, we won't be coming out until Macros is finished. We will arrive in the Earth realm, the lowest level of the monolith interior.
A lot of the game's lore is placed within codexes, which function a lot like Grimoire cards in the original Destiny. You literally go around collecting these codexes in order to get more of what the game has to offer to you in terms of lore. And unfortunately, it doesn't work in this game. For me, this kind of world building only really worked with the Dark Souls genre, and it left the story of the game up to interpretation of the players, which is part of the appeal of the Souls genre. The devs obviously built a world, and the lore is there, but instead of telling it to the player, they're like, here you go. But back to the subject matter at hand. To Bungie and Ubisoft's credit, they learned from their mistakes and implemented more appeal to their story of their sequels through cutscenes and world building. Godfall is also plagued with bugs that for the first time in any game I've played, you needed to know the workaround to get your character functioning correctly again. For instance, if your light attack bugged out, you'd have to either switch weapons or activate your shield. Or let's say your dodge bugged out. The only way to get it to work either required you to get hit or die, which isn't ideal for those like me who play the game on hard and are limited to 3 lives before the mission is failed. Godfall also lacks much needed features for such a AAA title, much like how I felt with Anthem. There's no mass salvaging option for your gear, there's no ping system, no tab to filter out specific items that you may not be looking for when you're making a build. And there's no matchmaking. No matchmaking. All of these can be implemented or improved upon, but such additions are day one features, especially mass salvaging for your gear. Like, this is a looter. This isn't something that you include post-launch. But now that we got all the bad out the way, let's talk about the best part of the game, which is its combat. This is where Godfall succeeds. You can easily compare the game's combat to that of the recent God of War, even down to the smaller details of how the player's shield deploys, to the way that some of the shield attacks are animated. The takedowns also function a lot like God of War, in which whenever you stun an enemy, you will be prompted to take them down with a finishing move. Even when you use the dual blades, it's like a direct parallel to Kratos using his Chaos Blades. There are also quite a few different mechanics that can be used to defeat your enemies, some of which are dependent on the enemies you're fighting. You can breach enemies, which works well against shielded opponents or enemies who block. You can soul shatter enemies, which is the quickest way to dispatch ranged enemies or weaker minions. Or you can focus on hitting enemy weak points, which unless you have a certain item to bypass this, only show themselves after an enemy swings or is parried. There's also Archon Fury, which in a sense is a limited self buff that sends player into a frenzy by immensely increasing their stats for a short period of time. Think Kratos' Spartan Rage from God of War. You can also mark enemies, which will provide buffs for the player or debuffs for the enemy. You can focus on proccing elements like fire or build around critical hit chance and damage. Best part of all this is that there's no cost to respecing your skills, which will allow you to try out different builds that just don't pertain to where you invested your skill points into your character. You can create multiple save files for different playthroughs, but there's literally no point, seeing that you can respec an unlimited amount of times. Respecing stats in games like Dark Souls come at a price and are limited to each playthrough. This encourages players to play through the game from start to finish with different builds. Alright, let's talk about Valor Plates. Warframe. There's also Valor Plates which players would already have half of buys. My bad. I'm only laughing because we were calling these things Warframes like the entirety of the game. Anyway, these function similar to frames from Warframe, which I still prefer to call them because it just sounds cooler. They're meant to encourage players to create builds around these armor sets. For instance, the primary stat for Lion Mane's Valor Plate would be ideal for anyone looking to create a shield build or a build around your Archon Fury ability. If you use his brother's plate, the Hinter Claw, you'd be inclined to build around crit chance and damage. Each Valor Plate also has augmented slots where you'd dive deeper into implementing augments that cater towards your desired build. Let's get down to the loot. The game gives players 2 weapons, an amulet and charm, 2 rings, and a life stone and banner to cycle in and out of your loadouts. There are 5 different weapon types, being the long sword, dual blades, pole arm, great sword, and hammer, all of which slightly differ in functionality. The higher loot drops for these weapons offer some unique differences in appearance, with some differences in stats. I just would like a few more differences in how the weapons function when it comes to legendary versions of each weapon. Either way, I still highly enjoy the combat. Aside from the weapons, the rings, amulets, and charms will alter stats based on those item rolls. The lifestone and banner only offer stat increases or buffs for a limited time upon use of one of those items. Also, one thing I like about the game is that it contains its own guide and description of every stat in the game. No need to visit any third-party sources for this info. Before we get to the summary of this video, I will show you what the in-game has to offer and a look at a couple of my builds, then I'll wrap up the video. Alright, so before we take off, of course, I'm gonna do what we normally do. Does Godfall deserve an L or dub? I'm gonna have to give it an L, unfortunately. Though the game does have potential, has great combat, and succeeds within the looter genre, the devs unfortunately released an unpolished and buggy game, missing day one features, and a easily forgettable story that does not warrant the $75 price tag on PS5. It's become too much of a norm for unfinished games to be released by developers, and no matter if I enjoyed the game, and I'm 60 hours invested into Godfall, We as gamers can't overlook its shortcomings, and we will continue to hold developers accountable, or else these things won't see change. Well, that's all I have for you guys today. See you next time.